Hello, hope you're well. I'm going to get right into it today. I got a soundtrack in the mail the other day, and it was the first time it's ever been released on wax. And it just got me thinking I wouldn't mind talking about the movie because this is a movie I think is vastly underrated. It's by one of my favorite directors. I think he was often misunderstood when he was making movies. He doesn't really make movies anymore because there just isn't room for him in today's climate of directors and movies, which is vastly sad and unfortunate, in my opinion. But it just made me want to talk about it. And this probably won't be the longest video. My videos have been creeping up over an hour lately, so I want to keep it. I want to rein it in when it comes to the running time on my videos. Last year I was keeping them around 20 minutes or so, and I want to try to do that here too. So there's a lot to say about this movie though. So I want to cram in as many ideas and thoughts as I can, and then hopefully you guys will fill in the blanks for me and fill in any empty spaces that I don't mention because I could talk about this movie for a long time. But I look forward to your comments on this movie because it does divide audiences, it seems. Not so much anymore. It did then, the time it came out. I don't know that it does anymore as much. I think people have learned to appreciate this movie a little bit more than they did then. And it's the 40-year anniversary of this movie too, so it's a nice round number to talk about this. Body Double. This is the Blu-ray, the Indicator Blu-ray. This is by the way, a Region Zero basically Blu-ray, which means it's all regions. You can watch this on any player anywhere in the world, which is a bonus because Indicator's based out of the UK, I think, and they put out a lot of all region Blu-rays, which is good because here in the United States, a lot of movies that are made by big directors like Body Double, we haven't seen this even on a Blu-ray release here in the United States. We have to go to the UK to get stuff like this. So hopefully this will get a 4K release some point in the future. I mean, it boggles my mind that every Brian De Palma movie would not get that. But this is one of those movies I think, again, is underappreciated. It probably hasn't been released the way it should be. Not as many people have watched it. There haven't been as many sets of eyes on this movie because it's kind of infamous in some ways. But to me, Body Double is the ultimate Brian De Palma movie. And I'm interested to hear what other De Palma fans have to say about this. Body Double, more than any other movie he ever did, is the quintessential Brian De Palma experience. Everything he did so well is all encapsulated here, and then some. It seems like everything he ever did well is magnified 100 times in this movie. And I'll talk about some of the things I mean by that. I would easily rank this in the top five De Palma movies, maybe even top three. It's tough. But I love this movie. And again, I love it because it's vintage, quintessential De Palma. He takes every element that he always shoved down our throats when we watched his movies and he amps it up to 11. It's a brilliant movie because of it. It got a lot of controversy back in the day, and I'll talk about that. I think it's completely unwarranted, the controversy. I think this movie is what it is. He's telling a certain story within a certain world, and because of that, you have to make the story a little dirty, a little seedy. It's a seedy world with seedy characters, and you have to have a seedy storyline. And let's face it, that's a lot of what De Palma did. A lot of his characters were very seedy, very flawed, very deviant, even perverted. And obviously, De Palma, he gets accused a lot of, obviously so, of being an Alfred Hitchcock clone. I don't see how that's a bad thing. I would challenge anybody who watches modern film to compare a movie that isn't trying to be something else that came long before it. I would argue that the last truly original filmmaker was Stanley Kubrick. There really hasn't been a movie that pushed any boundaries in any major, astounding way since arguably 2001. It's been a long time since the way we view movies has been redefined. Sure, you can tell an original story, a fresh story, you can direct it in a fresh, interesting way. But I don't think movie has really been redefined in the last 50 years. And what I mean by redefined is the way we watch a movie, the way we experience film. Maybe Spielberg. Steven Spielberg more or less created the blockbuster when he did Jaws, and that was not yet 50 years ago. Almost 50 years. That came out in 1975. So next year will be the 50th anniversary of that. But there are only a few filmmakers in history that changed our wiring in terms of how we watch movies. Spielberg, Kubrick, Hitchcock. And so when people accuse him of just ripping off Hitchcock, I think that's a horrible analogy. Plenty of filmmakers have been ripping off Hitchcock. De Palma just does it with his heart on his sleeve. He doesn't care if anybody knows that or not. He just makes his movies because he loves Hitchcock. And by the way, who doesn't love Hitchcock? I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think what De Palma did really well, if there were any other director I would compare De Palma to, or rather I would compare this director to De Palma, would be Quentin Tarantino. I think what Tarantino does now is what De Palma was starting to do with Hitchcock. With Tarantino, he makes movies, he'll just basically take a premise of a movie and just repackage it like he did with Hateful Eight. I've talked about this in previous videos, but I always thought Hateful Eight was just a repackaging of John Carpenter's The Thing. He made it a Western, but John Carpenter has always kind of made Westerns anyway, even though his movies are horror movies. They're essentially Western movies. That's what inspired him, and that's the kind of movie he made. Tarantino is constantly repackaging older ideas and updating it to this brilliant new experience. I love Quentin Tarantino, by the way. I am not slamming him at all. De Palma did the same thing with Hitchcock. Go ahead and disagree with me, but I have never had a problem with De Palma just basing his whole career off of what he experienced from watching Hitchcock movies. And I would argue that he never does that more brilliantly than here, very specifically to Vertigo. The main character here, Jake, he has a problem with, he gets into the tight spaces and he starts experiencing these hallucinations and vertigo type symptoms. I mean, this movie is Vertigo in a lot of ways, and Rear Window. Tons of Hitchcock movies were based on voyeurism, and that is De Palma's big. Every movie he ever made has some voyeuristic quality to it. None more so than this. I mean, it's right on the cover. And what I love about Body Double, and I think arguably this is the one movie where he exhibited this more blatantly and openly than any other movie he ever did, was how over the top this movie is. This movie is so blatantly over the top with everything it does, with the sex, with the violence, with the seediness, with the saturated colors, with the homages to Hitchcock. All of that stuff is so amped up in this movie, and I think it's all the more brilliant because of it. It's so pushed over the top that the movie almost becomes an existence and an observance, not existence, but an observance of just meta, way before meta was even a big thing like it is now. Like a scene that I might point out to prove my point would be the Frankie Goes to Hollywood scene, where Jake enters into the porn set and Holly Johnson shows up to sing his own song, Relax. I think I remember seeing an interview with De Palma where he was like, well, I want to play the song Relax. Why don't we just put the music video right into the movie? Let's just bring Holly Johnson out to sing the song and have him be part of it. I can see why that might turn a lot of people off, but that's one of the reasons I love this movie. It's just so over the top and so so excessive that you can't help but love it. You're either in this world or you're not. It's a very seedy world, and here's part of the seediness. Let's just go completely over the top with it and shove this down people's throats. If they don't like it, oh well. That's just one example. And that's something that De Palma did really well in all of his movies. The movie he did before this, his biggest movie, arguably, was Scarface. For me, to me, even to this day, Scarface is still his greatest achievement. It's his most obvious and best movie he's ever made, I think, is Scarface. But again, he went completely over the top with Scarface. And you had to do that. But instead of going the dark way, like you had this really seedy underbelly of a world where people were evil and killing each other and there were drugs everywhere and everyone had secondary motivations and most of them were criminal. Rather than have that world exist in a dark, dreary place, he amped up the whites and it was sunny and it was daylight and he had pastel colors and colorful suits and it was bright. You don't see that very often. It's hard to ever find any movie or even TV show where it's a really dark, seedy, violent world set amongst sunlight and bright colors. I mean, the only other instance I can think of in entertainment that's ever done it successfully maybe is Breaking Bad, which, by the way, with the exception of The Sopranos, the greatest TV show I've ever seen. But that was what was brilliant about Breaking Bad too. All this awful shit was happening when the sun was out and everyone was happy and giving us these happy vibes. It was that juxtaposition that made it work. And that's what I like about this. It's this movie is set in a seedy world, but it is set amongst darkness. Most of this movie is shot at night, but you still get the neons, the brightly lit colors, bright lights. For example, when the woman is getting drilled in the bedroom, you get this bright light and the drill goes down to the ceiling and the blood's coming out. It's not dark in there. You've got light reflecting off every angle. And so again, De Palma's like showing you everything. It's a voyeuristic movie, and I thought that's why it was important to make sure everything was visible all the time. And that's what he was a master at. And De Palma loved going over the top. He loved making movies that pissed people off, but he was also just into this type of film. Look at his body of work. Again, Scarface, Blowout, Dress to Kill, even the Untouchables, Casualties of War. He doesn't shy away from harsh material, and he's not afraid to show it to you in very brightly lit patterns and colors and schemes. And he does do that to a big extent here. Now, this movie pissed a lot of people off when it came out. And of course, I feel like it was unjustly so. This world is set in the world of porno. And I think a lot of people had a problem with that. Of course they are. There's always going to be someone who's uptight about sex and porno, and it's just always going to be a thing. But in a world that exists in porno, how can you deal with that world without telling a story like this? It has to be over the top and hard to watch even. And it's got to be filled with characters that you don't trust. I mean, really, this whole cast is filled with people that you don't really fully trust. It's even Jake, the main character, he gets into this trouble because he's peeping on somebody. This is another one of those times where you kind of feel like every character in the movie has something seriously wrong with them. They all have a major flaw. And I love that about movies. Again, going back to Tarantino, that's what made Hateful Eight so great. Every character in that movie was a total and utter scumbag. And so here I really appreciate that about this movie. Something is askew with the psychology of each and every character in this movie. And that's why the movie kind of keeps you off balance. It's a fun movie because of those things. And you get the sense that Brian De Palma is extracting some amount of glee from that. Like I'm going to put all these characters who are all flawed into this weird, fucked up world and just have them try to survive amidst this Hitchcockian background. I'm going to throw some Vertigo in there. I'm going to throw some Rear Window in there, and it's fun. This is a great movie. I think it's vastly underrated, and I do think it gets unfairly maligned. Back then, of course, it took a big hit from feminists, but sometimes I wonder the people who call themselves feminists if they're not just creating a hoopla and a story just to bring more attention onto themselves. Again, this is a movie set in the world of porno where consenting adults are doing things, and this is the story that he's telling. It got accused too of being really harsh to women, but I didn't see it this way. I still don't. I just watched this movie a few days ago. I've seen it many times. I don't think this is, if anything, this movie is celebrating women. Call me crazy and call me a bastard if you want, but this is a movie that celebrates women. Really, by the end of the movie, the real heroine is Holly Body, the girl played by Melanie Griffith. I would I would absolutely and harshly refute any arguments that Brian De Palma is a misogynist. Absolutely not. It's quite the contrary. He loves women. Go watch his movies. He's in love with women, if you ask me. He's fascinated with everything about them, and that's why I like this movie. You can see it. You can see it in the screen, but he took a hit for scenes like with the woman getting drilled. It's amazing to me how many times feminists can see phallic structures and imagery in a movie. It, it, it explains more about where they are coming from, much more than it does Brian De Palma. It's funny to me how fixated feminists or people who say they're feminists. It's funny to me how fixated they can get on dick. They sure think about dick a lot. That's all I'm saying. When I when I first saw this movie back in the mid 80s, I was a kid, I was probably 12 or 13 when I first saw this. And when I saw the drill going into the woman, to me, I thought it was an absolutely essential gesture to film because the guy was on the floor below. You had to see the drill go through the floor and see the blood come through. I mean, it made perfect sense to me. I wouldn't have even ever thought it was a phallic reference until somebody else mentioned it. So again, I think that kind of criticism reflects more of what those people are trying to project on their own hangups and issues onto the movie itself. I don't think that's what De Palma was trying to do. Maybe to some extent, because the drill's going through the man's legs, maybe he was trying to execute some sort of filmic reference to porno or something. But I never, ever would guess that that's him being a misogynist. I don't know how people would extract that from that. Doesn't make any sense. Um, but again, that's not where my brain goes. That's the beauty of film, by the way. Even the people who are offended by that, I mean, it's valid. It's valid for them to have that point. That's the beautiful thing about film and music and everything is you take your own life experience and you apply it to whatever you're watching. But that's one of the things that people had a serious problem with in this movie. To me, I will always look at this movie as a movie that De Palma got to make in the wake of Scarface. Scarface came out the year before, and it did relatively well. And I think the movie studios gave De Palma some money to make whatever movie he wanted, and this was his passion project. And I think everything that De Palma was great at is here in this movie amplified. And that's why it's one of my favorite De Palma movies. I'd put it right up there with Scarface, Carlito's Way, and The Untouchables. I think those maybe are my three favorites from him. Dress to Kill is way up there. Carrie is great. Casualties of War, I think, is another very underrated movie from him. He's a great director, but I would put this way up there. I love this movie. The other thing about this movie, as seedy as it is and violent as it is, and as much dirty sex as you see in this movie, which is all entertaining, it's also really fucking funny. This movie's really funny. De Palma's sense of humor in this movie has never been more evident in any of his other movies, I think. Really funny movie. It's just got everything. Everything you could possibly love about De Palma, it's all thrown in here and stirred around in a pot. And it's a real treat to watch. It never ages either. I saw this movie back in the mid 80s at some point. HBO used to show this all the time. It was one of those HBO specials back in the 80s. And I just watched it again. It's brilliant. It's just fun. Sometimes movies are just fun to watch. Is it hardcore? I mean, I guess. I don't know. It just depends on how uptight you are, I think, in my opinion. This movie, I mean, I wouldn't say it's tame, but I definitely it's almost like a comic book schlocky type of movie. It's almost goofy. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's all the more better for it. It has very good performances. Some are better than others, but I think De Palma is at the top of his game as a director here. Every little scene is scrutinized over. You can just see it. It's a beautiful movie, and I would highly recommend anybody watch this if you've never seen it. And if you've seen it, go watch it again. This is a very good Blu-ray. It's loaded with special features, as you can see. It's got some documentaries, and I don't know, does it have a commentary? It must have a commentary on here. It's got ultimate sound options. Yeah, maybe it doesn't have a commentary. It's got a lot of little documentaries on it, though. This is a movie that should be celebrated. There's just so many scenes. I'm trying to think of all the scenes that are some of my favorites. The Holly Johnson, Frankie Goes to Hollywood scene is fantastic. The way that De Palma goes back and forth between the two women, like Jake, it's basically the minute he meets Melanie Griffith, he's got her pinned up against the wall and he's fucking her, but his mind is going to the woman he sees in the underpass at the beach. It's going from Relax to the soundtrack by the man I'm going to get into here in a minute. That's one of my favorite scenes. I just thought it was really well directed and well written and well executed. The scene in the house where the woman's getting drilled, that's a very intense scene. Again, directed with absolute precision and passion by Brian De Palma. Some of the close-ups and the zoom-ins he does, it's masterfully done. This is a really fantastic movie. And I forget, his name's Craig Wasson, I think. Wasson? Craig Wasson, yeah, he's the one that plays Jake. He does a really, really good job. Melanie Griffith, obviously. This was the movie that shot Melanie Griffith into the stratosphere. Nobody knew who she was before this. So this made her career, basically. And she's fantastic in the movie. She's very funny. Great dialogue. The scene where Jake is following the woman on the beach, the woman he watches get murdered, the scene where he's following her in the mall and just the decisions that De Palma makes with his voyeuristic qualities with the camera. It's just beautiful stuff. Really, just a very. There are scenes in this movie that are almost like a trance. It's very meditative, but then he snaps you right back out of it with some really intense violence or something. It's quite a movie. You've never seen another movie like this. I would challenge anybody to find another movie that's remotely like this. And that is exactly why it should be celebrated, in my opinion. When you see a movie that is unlike any other, that's something that should be absolutely 100% cherished and celebrated. Body Double. I love this movie for many reasons, but the main one is just the fact that it's an original experience. I've never seen anything like it. It's like eating a big decadent ice cream cone when I watch this movie. It's just filled with things you know you probably shouldn't be getting yourself involved with, but it's so tasty and delicious. You just can't help yourself. That's what this movie is. It's like a really nice dessert. Beautiful movie, Body Double. Brian De Palma, absolutely his most underrated movie. It's not even close. Go watch this movie if you've never seen it. Now, the reason I brought the movie up is because this just got released on Waxwork Records. And I really like Waxwork Records. In terms of these new boutique reissue, repress labels that repress soundtracks, Waxwork is my favorite. There are a couple that I just don't like and I won't buy stuff from. I really like Waxwork. These guys do a really nice job. And this is the first time that we have this soundtrack on vinyl. In fact, this never even got released as a soundtrack back in its day that it got released. I think it got released on CD back in 2008 or something, like 15 or 16 years ago. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I think it was 2008 or 9 or something. It finally got a full soundtrack release, but it never had it. which is crazy to me. The first 25 years of its existence, it never got a soundtrack release. But now this is the first time that the soundtrack gets released from Pino Donaggio. Pino Donaggio, his full soundtrack. That I was talking about how Brian De Palma consternated over every little detail and tidbit of his movie. The music is no exception. It's great. The soundtrack is fantastic. Some of the music is really phenomenal stuff. It's very surprising it never got a soundtrack release in its day. But this is the first time it's ever been out on wax, and I wanted to show this. This is what prompted me to watch the movie the other day, because I got this in the mail last week from Waxwork. Very nice glossy cover, no perforation notches on the side. It's a gatefold sleeve, it's a double album. There's the back cover. I love this kind of 80s neon vibe with the font here on Body Double. You get the 2 records worth, side A, side B, side C, side D, all the music. It's all here. Pino Donaggio does a fantastic job here. Here is the gatefold. There's that drill again I was talking about. That's the scene right there. I mean, they definitely make it look like it here. Waxwork doesn't really support my theory at all with this image. There's no doubt that this is a phallic reference, but again, I would argue that you see what you want to see in life. If you want to see nothing but dick everywhere and blame the dick for every problem that you have in your life, then you're free to do that. I think it's a sad way to live, but it is what it is. I think Brian De Palma was trying to make a grander point with that scene. This is record 1. You just get plain old inner sleeves there. Get this on nice red, kind of transparent red wax here. The pressing's not bad either. Sounds pretty good. Again, Waxwork does a pretty nice job. Their quality control seems to be very, very good. Much better than reissue soundtrack companies like Mondo. I won't buy anything from Mondo. I think they're kind of a joke. And here's record 2. They did this with Dawn of the Dead too. This one has a poly inner. The other one didn't. Can anyone explain this? Why is this happening? Why does one get a poly and the other one doesn't? I thought maybe it's the color. Maybe depending on what color you're using, it makes the vinyl more susceptible for scratches. I mean, I don't know. Vinyl's vinyl, isn't it? It doesn't really matter what the color is. Anyway, hopefully someone from Waxwork will watch this at some point and maybe answer. Anyway, you get transparent blue, kind of marbled blue on this one. Again, the pressing sounds good, and this music's really good. So good. I mean, there have been many years where I really wish to have this soundtrack on wax, and now that time is finally here. And so I get to couple my movie with a very excellent soundtrack. And the soundtrack, it's very 80s. You know, it's symphonic to a degree, but it also has a lot of synthesizer work, and it sounds like something that only could have come out in the 80s. And I like the 80s as a decade for music in general. So pick this up, Waxwork Records. I'm assuming you could probably still buy it. I don't know. A lot of this shit sells out pretty quickly, but give it a shot. Why not? Once this goes away, you'll probably never get another chance to buy it. So excellent music, an excellent movie. Again, one of the most underrated the most underrated Brian De Palma movie, I think, is Body Double. And it's not even close. And I truly hope that those of you who watch this who have never seen this movie, maybe you watch my channel for all the music stuff I talk about, and you're used to watching my stuff and watching my videos. If you've never seen this, go watch it and then let me know what you think. If I can direct just one person who's never seen this before to go watch this movie, I've done my job as a YouTube creator. Body Double. Beautiful movie. All right, I'll talk to you next time. Thanks. Bye.